If you guys have decided you want to buy some weightlifting shoes, you guys want to know what is the difference between the TYR F1 lifters and the LuXiaoJun Power Pro ones. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How do these shoes compare and which one should you buy based on your needs? Both shoes are perfectly fine, but each shoe will do different situations better. So before we go any further, this video is time-stamped. So please, if you want to jump to just talking about the TYR, just talking about the Lu, go right ahead. The way we're going to do this video is I'm going to talk just a little bit about the TYR, a little bit about the Lu. I'm going to show you guys an entire week of my training in the TYRs and an entire week in the Lus. Exactly the same sets and reps. The weights are certainly different. They're week to week. But that way you guys can see and hear my commentary on both shoes. Now, real quickly, if you guys just want an answer now, if you're a CrossFitter and you do some weightlifting, but you also want to put weightlifting into a WOD, such as doing snatches with kettlebell swings, kipping pull-ups, and row machine, I highly recommend you get the TYR F1 lifter. Now, if you guys are dedicated to just squatting, if you guys are full-on weightlifters and you came into the sport a little late, such as myself, I started weightlifting when I was in my 20s. If you have some mobility issues, this shoe is definitely going to be better than the TYR shoe. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Okay, talking the TYR F1 shoe. Now, I actually have owned this shoe a lot longer than I own my LuXiaoJun Power Pro, so I'm a lot more comfortable in this shoe. Now, that is one of the main features of this shoe. It is very comfortable, right? It's got a softer upper material. It's somewhat flexible. The heel doesn't even seem like it's too stiff. So walking around in these is really not a big problem. A lot of you are considering the TYR shoes because of this wide toe box. Now that can be good and that can be bad. So when it comes to, again, doing CrossFit style things where you're going from one to the next, maybe you got to jump to a pull-up bar, whatever, and you have weightlifting involved, and the half-inch heel of your Metcons or your Reebok Nanos just isn't quite enough heel for you, this 3/4 inch heel plus the flexibility, this might make a good shoe for you. Now, that wide toe box, it's good and it's bad. So it's good because you can move your toes. The shoe doesn't feel too stiff around your feet. Certainly shoes break in, but your toes are able to spread, and that can be good and bad. If you're doing multiple snatches in a set, so let's say you're doing 2 or 3 repetitions at a time, your feet will move around in this shoe, and that will change every single repetition you do. And if you're trying to excel to the highest level of weightlifting, you can't be doing 1 rep over here, 1 rep over there, and your feet are sliding back and forth. So that can actually be a negative. Now, Josh, I have extremely wide feet. This shoe can be great for you. I will say, even though this isn't talking about the LuXiaoJun shoe is not a wide toe box shoe, but it is wide where it needs to be wide. And we'll talk more about that later. So if you're only buying this shoe because of the wide toe box, please keep in mind, if you're just weightlifting, it may not be the shoe for you. Some other really positives. So the double strap on top, both shoes have it. I really love it. The soft material is breathable. If you train in a garage like I do in the summer and it's really hot, this shoe breathes. Your feet aren't going to smell. Your feet are going to feel nice. I finish a 2-hour workout and it doesn't really seem like my feet are sweating too much. In my Lu shoes, they definitely sweat quite a bit more. But another negative of this shoe is inside, again, because your toes can move around, your heel can also move around. And you'll see later on in this video when I'm actually comparing side by side my Lu shoes versus my TYR shoes in weightlifting, you'll actually see that this material allows my whole heel, my whole foot to be moving around. And even though I tie these things as tight as I possibly can, that is a problem for me. I will say though, on squats, perfectly fine shoe. If you're squatting anything under 500 pounds, you're not going to care that it squishes a little bit under your toe. You're not going to care that it's a little sloppy, a little slipping, because you're just planting your feet and you're squatting, right? Now, if you are squatting heavier weights, right? So we're talking well over 500 pounds, because this shoe is so soft, right? I can literally push my fingers all the way through. Because it's so soft, you will have a squishing sensation under your feet as the weights get heavier. And even if you're doing pulls. If you're doing deadlifts, again, north of 500 pounds, you will feel these shoes squishing, which can be a good thing, but can also be a bad thing, right? And the biggest bad thing is if it's squishing, that means the shoe is absorbing some of that force that you're trying to put into the ground. But again, if you need a shoe that you can go from one activity to the next, to the next, to the next, the TYR shoe is definitely, of all the shoes I've worn, from Adidas powerlifting shoes to Romaleos 2 and 4 to the NoBull shoes, this shoe is definitely going to allow you to do multiple exercises of similar nature. I would not run in these. I might box jump in these, but again, only if the workout is doing cleans, maybe I'm doing jerks, maybe I'm doing snatches along with something else. If all you're doing is squatting, I highly recommend you get your Reebok Nanos, you get your Metcons, you get your NoBull trainers. That will work just fine. Okay, we're talking the Lu shoe now. So going back to the TYR shoe, the TYR shoe has a wider toe box than this shoe. Now, again, I talked about the pros and cons of that. Even though this shoe doesn't necessarily have a wide toe box, for me, it's plenty wide right around the ball of my foot. So I do have thicker feet, right? They're not slender by any means, but my toes don't spread like fingers per se. So I don't necessarily need a bunch of width in my toes, but it's right where the ball of my foot is. That's where I need the width, and that's what is provided with this shoe. So again, if you have thicker or wider feet, is it in your toes that you're wide, or is it in the ball of your foot that you're wide? If it's in the ball of your foot, both shoes will be just fine. Now, I will say this shoe has a lot more lining inside of the shoe than the TYR. Now, I talked about this with the TYR shoe. This shoe does make your feet sweat if you're prone to sweaty feet. It does cup your foot a lot more. Now, there's some good benefits to that. Number one, it's going to help keep your foot secure, because when you first buy a pair of shoes, it's pretty stiff getting in. Even the TYRs were kind of stiff getting in. But once that shoe's broken in and all of that material on the inside is broken in, it's almost like you've created a perfect glove for your foot. Again, your feet will sweat. These shoes are not flexible. These shoes, it's hard for me to even bend, let alone as much as the TYRs bend. So I'm going to bend this a little and then pull the TYR back up just so you can see that. I mean, I can fold this thing in half. There's really no resistance there at all. There is no way I'm getting this toe to touch this strap. There's no way. So this material is so much stiffer. And I have worn these in quite a bit, even though I only have a week of lifting in them for this video. I did wear them well over a week, walking around a lot. They are plenty broken in, so that, again, I can let you know this material is very, very synthetic, but again, it's very, very rigid. So some of the things you'll see when I'm talking with the TYR and the Lu shoes next to each other when I'm lifting is you'll see the TYR shoes move around a lot. These shoes, there isn't a whole lot of play. Again, I can't even really twist these shoes. I can definitely twist this shoe quite a bit, right? So again, it's not a comfortable shoe. Walking in these suck, okay? This is not a shoe you're gonna get off the row machine and do snatches with and go back to the row machine. This shoe, you're pretty much bolted to your platform. Maybe you go to the bathroom once or twice. It is clunky, it is heavier, and you can tell in the heel when you actually put this on, boy, it goes heel toe, where the TYR shoe, because it's more flexible, you can certainly walk better. But as a weightlifter, we're not walking, right? We're sliding our feet maybe forward in a split jerk. We're sliding them to the sides when we're doing cleans and snatches. We need to make sure they are rigid. Now, for me personally, the 1-inch heel of this shoe, the TYRs being a 3/4, so 0.75, the 1-inch heel here works really good for me. It allows me to have a better torso angle. I can be more upright because I have a tendency to lean forward, especially on snatches. It really helps glue me to the floor. The bottom constructions are very similar between the TYR and the Lu shoe. You can see how there are fins that are pushing out. But again, these fins are somewhat flexible, where these fins, these are so rigid, it actually hurts my hand trying to squeeze it. And it's not because the shoe wore in more. It's the sole of this shoe is made of a harder rubber, right? The heels are pretty much the same. They pretty much line up. Everything is identical. Again, I'm working with two right-handed shoes, so it's tough to actually compare. But again, the the sole of the shoe is a lot harder. This shoe is much louder than the TYR shoe. Now that can be a great thing, especially if you're doing a power variation, right? You're doing a power clean, a power jerk, or a power snatch. When you need to move fast, get your feet planted fast, and get the most power into the ground as fast as you can, so you can turn that bar over and rack it as high as possible so you're not squatting. This shoe, you're not gonna lose a lot to the shoe. Is it a lot? Not necessarily, even in the TYR shoe. It is squishier, but it is something to consider. Now, one huge thing I want to talk about is the split jerk. If you do clean and jerks, chances are you do the split jerk. Now, the TYR shoe for split jerks, terrible in comparison to the LuXiaoJun shoe. Now, Josh, why is that? Is it a technique thing? No, not necessarily. It's because of that toe box. Because my toes can move around in my split jerk, when I go into that back, when I drive my foot back into that split, because the toe box allows for so much room, my toes will shift to one side or another every once in a while. So if I hit, even if I hit perfectly, but let's say I have a little extra pressure on my big toe, my whole foot is going to twist toward, and my back knee is actually going to cave in. If I'm a little off and maybe I'm putting a little too much pressure towards my pinky toe, all of a sudden this whole shoe can twist, and I'm gonna completely lean to that side, and I'm gonna lose the stability in my back leg. So sometimes consistency, especially repetition to repetition, if you're doing multiple jerks out of the rack, let's say, first jerk, maybe you nail it perfectly, then you reline up, but again, your foot moves when you're moving around, and then you do your next one, and oh, your foot was just slightly over here a little bit, so that when you actually rack that bar, your foot's gonna roll. So again, if you care about the maximal weight you can do, especially on a split jerk, these might not be for you, even if you're a CrossFitter. If you're a CrossFitter, you may have to use your training shoe. Again, you can use your TYR training shoe, your Reebok, your Metcon, your NoBull, whatever, not your Inov-8. You can use your training shoe and do your clean and jerks just fine. But when it comes to a 1 rep max clean and jerk, if you truly care about that jerk, you need to have a shoe that's going to hold your foot still. And I just don't feel like the TYR's wide toe box allows for that. Now, what could TYR do to be a little bit better so that maybe you would want a better shoe? They can have a similar inside lining as the LuXiaoJun shoe. So here's what I mean. They can give you that toe box, but I want you to have to earn that toe box, right? Rather than just getting this soft material that comes completely stretched out when you first buy it, I want it to be a lot more rigid on the inside, a foam, whatever. That way, as you move your toes and as you wiggle around, the shoe actually breaks in to how you lift. Now, that can be a good thing if you have good habits. It can be a bad thing if you have bad habits. But I want to earn that toe box, because then if I split jerk like this every single time and my toes spread like that every single time, I'm limited by the width based on where my toes can open, not because the shoe itself came where a big foot could fit into the shoe.
Okay, let's compare side by side the TYR shoes and the LuXiaoJun shoes. So first we're going to start with snatches. If you don't care about snatches, you can certainly go to the timestamps and go right to jerks, right to cleans, right to squats, whatever you need to know more about when it comes to these shoes. Now with the snatches themselves, there isn't a huge difference between the shoes, their performance, but there is something I want you guys to notice. And if you watch the Lu shoes, so first we'll watch some doubles, then we'll watch some power snatches, then we're going to watch some heavy singles. And just look back and forth between the shoes, and you'll notice my stance consistently is a little bit narrower on the LuXiaoJun shoes. And when I catch the bar, and I'll actually pause after this first snatch, I'm going to show you the difference in my posture. And it's strictly because the LuXiaoJun shoes help with my ankle mobility a little extra because of that 1/4 inch heel. So let's watch that. And right there, as you can see, my catch position is going to be a little bit more upright and a little bit more consistent. I'm going to have a lot better stacking because, again, these shoes are allowing me to drive my knees forward a little bit more while still giving me a lot of support. If I did that with these shoes, there'd be a clear gap between my foot and the platform. So again, for me, the LuXiaoJun shoes are winning. So let's see that as a double. We hit, and again, I'm able to catch it a lot more upright and a little bit narrow of a stance. The reason having a more narrow stance can be beneficial is I don't have to move my feet as far, right? So on the squat snatches, if you're not having to move your feet as far, you can get under it faster. So we'll watch these heavy singles. I'll pause in the squat so that you can see the difference. So again, Lu shoes a lot closer together, right under my hips, just outside of hip width, I would say, where my TYR shoes I have to go a little bit wider because I can't push my knees forward as much. Now, the reason that's a huge difference too is if I can push my knees forward more, that can bring my hips lower in the snatch. I can catch it lower, I can lift more weight. So again, for me, the Lu shoes win. Now, let's talk about overhead squats a little bit. So on the overhead squats, you can see I'm walking forward and back, rocking forward and back a little bit, but I'm clearly more bent over with my white shirt, that would be the TYR shoes, and I'm more upright with the Lu shoes because again, that extra heel. Yep, just as balanced. I can squat relatively the same height, right? And we'll see it a couple times so you can kind of look back and forth. So again, my squats are pretty much the same except for the fact that I can shove my shins forward a little bit more and I can get my hips down pretty much lower. Okay, pulls. Because the shoes have a little bit more bend, my chest can be a little bit taller from the start, where I have to be a little bit more bent over. Now, for some people, being bent over more is actually a benefit. For me though, I need to get my chest up a little bit higher. Now you'll see on these pulls that my feet move quite a bit while I'm lifting because I'm shifting that weight around in the blades of my feet trying to stay balanced as I'm moving. Now, what you'll also notice is with the TYR shoes, because my feet are moving so much, it's not just my foot moving. It's my foot moving inside of the shoe. So even though my feet move exactly the same, my shoe with the Lu shoe moves with my foot, where as I'm moving my foot, the shoes aren't moving. And the problem with that with the TYR shoes is if you're doing multiple reps in a row, all of a sudden you have zero support from the shoe. It's not really staying fixated to your foot. So as your foot moves and the shoe needs to follow, it's not. And that's a big problem over the long term. So again, just watch how there's so much play inside of these shoes, where the Lu shoes, not nearly as much. Okay, let's talk cleans. So cleans. Start position, relatively the same. I already start with my feet pretty close together. The Lu shoes, I guess I start them in a little bit more. But what you will notice is when I rack this bar, my feet on the TYR shoes go out quite a bit further than they do on the Lu shoes. Now, why is that something worth noting? If I move my feet further because I don't have as much ankle mobility, that's technically more time, and we're talking, split seconds, tenths of a second. That's more time that my feet are moving and less time making contact with the ground so that I can rack the bar and slow it down. So because I can bend my ankles more, I don't have to move my feet as far, and because I can bend them more, I can actually get my knees under the bar faster. So they have to clear out of the way, I jump and get my knees back under the bar. And the Lu shoes allow me personally to do that faster. So let's watch this. This is a double. And I'm under. I catch it tight enough, right? I barely have to move my feet. Powers are the same way. Because I can start a little closer, I don't have to jump as far, I don't have to jump as wide. When I do make contact, same place, relatively the same elevation. So again, very similar technique. We can just look at the shoe. I can get my feet down faster, rack it faster, and stand up faster, even though it's heavier. Okay, so we were talking about jerks and how there is a difference. Now we got a double coming up here. And what I want you to note is when my TYR shoe is back, so I jerk with my left foot forward, so my right foot back, there's going to be a certain amount of flex in this shoe. Because it's so flexible, it actually allows me to bend in the ball or the arch of my foot so much that sometimes it actually lifts my heel up so much that my leg becomes super straight and it shoves my hips forward, which doesn't help in a catching situation. So let's see that first. Right, so if we just compare the distance between the heel and the floor, it's a big difference, and it's because of how flexible the shoe is. Now, trying to compare these as much as we can, it's two different jerks on two different days with two different thought processes with two different weights. So there is just a little bit of wiggle room there. But as I said before, it can be a problem if I put a little too much pressure in the pinky toe region that my heel will actually roll and then I'll actually cave in my leg and my hip. That happens far less with the Lu shoes. So let's see this double. Reset. I have them synced up so that they lift at the same time. Now, if you notice on my dip and drive, because these shoes allow my knees to travel more forward, my hips can travel down more easily. Where again, I don't have as good of ankle clearance on this with these shoes, so it does cause my hips to kick forward just a little bit. But again, if you have insane ankle mobility, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. Okay, heavy clean and jerks. So again, I can start with my feet a little bit closer so I can rack a heavier weight faster. These weights are only, what is that, 15 pounds different. So they're relatively close week to week, right? Let's watch the difference in jerks. So I clean it. It's a little tougher to see the jerk with the TYR shoes. But this kind of says everything. So because these shoes are so flexible, you can see how the bend in my back knee here and the bend in my front knee relatively the same with the Lu shoes. Why is that? Because the shoes don't allow me to bend in my foot because I'm trying to slam the ball of my foot down into the ground. They don't allow me to come forward into my toes. My toes can't shift into this bigger toe box. It's fixated in the shoe. So what that allows me to do is I'm allowed to plant this foot and then allow my front foot to slap straight down so that I can have these similar angles. Because this shoe is so flexible, I have to compensate for the bend that's going to happen by actually shooting my foot back a little bit further, which makes this bend a lot greater, right? So I have a lot greater in the front leg than I do in the back leg because it's pretty much, it's not piping straight, but I definitely want it to be more like this. And I 100% attribute that to the shoe. Because the Lu shoes, I'm lifting 15 pounds more and I'm able to achieve a better position. Front foot is in a relatively same place. It all comes down to that back leg. And if that back leg is straight, that's kicking your hips forward. Recovery is the same. Okay, let's talk pulls. Same deal. We're watching the shoes. There's a lot of slipping over here. There's less slipping over here. There's a 20-pound difference, so it really doesn't make too much of a difference. The speed is a little different. I was a little fatigued on the Lu day. Right? And we'll get to the peak of the contraction here. So one drawback to having such a stiff shoe is you don't get your heels up off the ground very much, where you do get them higher with the TYR shoes. Now, when you're going for maximal weight, you want your Lu shoe style, where your heels just barely come up. If you're fatigued doing a WOD with many reps, you're going to, with that fatigue, have a tendency to want to over pull. Now, in that fatigue, I'm not saying you should over pull, but these TYR shoes will allow you to over pull. What I mean by that is you're going to put more height on the bar because you're tired. You're not going to be as fast. So you're going to use more of your strength than you are your speed as you get tired. So you're going to want to get your heels up a little bit higher so that you have just a little bit more time to get around that bar. If you're trying to lift maximally, you want to get those feet off the floor as quickly as you can and forget about how high the bar goes. But if you're doing, sets of 10 or you're doing grace, right, 30 repetitions, you need a little bit of wiggle room in that regard. So again, this is a triple. And bloop. Okay, squats. Different angles, I have to apologize for that. But what this pause highlights really well is the amount that I'm able to bend in my ankle. So on the TYR side, I haven't actually gotten my knees all the way forward. Okay, there we are. So you can just see how much more dorsiflexion I can achieve with the LuXiaoJun shoes. Now, is that something I need to work on? Absolutely. But this brings my hips under the bar a little bit better. It puts more weight into my quadriceps and less into my back. Over here, I'm going to be using my hamstrings a little bit more than I would like to. When I hit this bottom position, my shins do shift a little bit, but I am losing a little bit of contact with the floor, where on the Lu shoes, I'm barely losing any, if I am at all. So we'll see this is a set of 4. Just watch. The Lu shoes just barely wiggle when I hit the bottom. The TYR shoes are actually holding me back. I can't push my shins forward as well as I'd like to. Same with back squats. So the cool thing about this is I did some pause squats in this program. Let's see if I can get, there we go. With the Lu shoe, I'm actually rising out of the bottom just a little bit already. But you can see how I'm really doing a good job of keeping my heels down. However, this angle is quite a bit different, right? Again, it's a little bit different of a camera angle. I certainly tried my best, but really watch how stable I am even though my knees are going forward. And I will guarantee you with the Lu shoes, again, it was 20 pounds heavier, I was feeling my quads so much more. I was able to just stack on top of them and stay on them.
So there you go, guys. The TYR shoe versus the Lu shoe, weightlifting wise. Both shoes are great. In fact, when it comes to the price, the TYR shoe is $200, the Lu shoe is $200, right? But I will say the TYR shoe, right now as I'm making this video, has quite a few, I will say, exaggerated color schemes similar to this, that it's only $140. So if you want to say if you buy the $140 version of these shoes, right, because it's a color scheme you may or may not like, but if you don't care, buy the $140 shoe. And I will say, if this shoe were always $150 and this shoe were $200, I would tell you this shoe, even with some of the problems that I was talking about. Because a $50 difference, no. But when we're comparing apples to apples, 200 to 200, for most people, the LuXiaoJun shoe is going to win. Again, if you're doing functional movement, functional training, CrossFit, where you're going from, again, snatch to kettlebell swings to pull-ups, similar muscle group exercises, totally fine. I wouldn't necessarily do lunges in these, but you certainly could. I wouldn't necessarily do burpees in these, but you certainly could. It is flexible enough you can get away with quite a few things. You're certainly not going to run in this. I would not recommend getting on a bike erg or an air bike in something like this. A row machine, a ski machine. But again, for versatility, this shoe will allow you to do so much more. For weightlifting, this shoe is where it's at. Right here, the LuXiaoJun shoe. This is going to be my preferred shoe. I'm going to do most of my lifting in this shoe. There are set circumstances where I may pull this shoe back out. But again, this is my go-to. And if you suffer from the same issues I do, a little lack of ankle mobility, you came into the sport a little later, you care mostly about weightlifting itself, how heavy can you snatch, how heavy can you clean, how heavy can you jerk, you can back squat, you can front squat, and you're trying to get a little bit deeper, this is the shoe for you. If that isn't what you are, this is the shoe for you, especially if you buy some of those wild color schemes for $140. So this was Coach Josh with Garage Gang Gyms, comparing the TYR shoe to the Lu shoe. I hope that helps you guys make an informed choice. I'll see you next time.